Welcome, everyone. We're really happy to have you here today with us for this conversation on stories from the field. To get us started here, we'll hand things off to Grad Dean Sean Bowler.
Hi, I won't stay long. Hi, it's just that while everybody settles. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. I've only got two things to say. One of which is, part of the motivation for this is to sort of put some of the challenges that humanities scholarship at the graduate level in particular face in this broader context. You know, sometimes it's always hard for us to sort out what's specific to us at UCR. Much as I love the institution, as you know, I'm sort of such a fanboy, it's that there are things that we may not do well or are distinctive to us. So the question is, what is that wider context and how can we see ourselves in that wider context? And UCHRI did this great job, I thought, in this the report that Cal is going to talk about. So that's the first thing, is that that's part of at least my motivation for doing this one. And the second one is, of course, to thank Cathy for joining us today from UCHRI, but also a quick thanks to all the work that went into this, because a lot of organizing and calendaring and so on went into this. So I'm going to thank in alphabetical order Dylan, Jeanette, and of course the fantastic Catherine Hanshaw of Centre for Ideas and Society, which is and remains one of the places on campus, I'll do the sales pitch, one of the places on campus that bring us together. You know, one of the things about administration is administrative arenas are areas where disciplines and departmental fights are fought out, you know, often about resources, about who gets what. And sometimes we forget that we have common purpose, common goals, common interests, and CIS is marvelous at reminding us about those commonalities, and that's doing no small part to the people who work there. So a big thanks to CIS for keeping us, keeping the UCR-ness going at UCR. I'm going to shut up now. Thank you all for joining.
All right, Joel, and I'd like to continue the event by formally welcoming you as co-director, Center for Ideas Society, and I want to open the occasion with something that's a bit different than the traditional UC Riverside land acknowledgement. I've always insisted, well, almost always insisted on a different type of acknowledgement that's actually a more explicitly anti-colonial one. So I want to open the occasion by honoring Rupert and Jeanette Costo's legacy of cultivating an indigenous bodily, archival, and epistemological presence at the UC Riverside campus. The Cahuilla, Tongva, Luiseño, and Serrano peoples are the original, surviving, and persistent human caretakers of the land, water, and air that is occupied by the University of California. This territory has never been ceded, just as indigenous sovereignty and self-determination have not been surrendered. UCR is inhabited by indigenous, Aboriginal, and First Nations peoples from all over the world, many of whom are among our faculty, students, and staff. UC Riverside is mere blocks away from the place where the Riverside Police Department stole the life of 19-year-old Taisha Miller in 1998, a reminder that this institution and the University of California generally has a long history of proximity to and active complicity in anti-Black state and state-condoned violence. It is thus with a sense of humble gratitude and urgent obligation that I ask us to confront the conditions that surround and permeate this gathering. I look forward to continuing to work with many of you to decolonize this world and to create possibilities for abolitionist thriving thought and creativity. Thank you all for that. So Center for Ideas Society has collaborated with our great graduate division dean, Sean Bowler, with our colleagues here as respondents, of course, with Kelly and UCHRI, to think deeply, to think sustainably, perhaps to catalyze longer and deeper kind of local conversations about how to think about the conditions of graduate student training and education, particularly in the humanities and humanities-based interdisciplines, perhaps leaking into other practices, including terminal degrees in the fine arts, including the social sciences that engage with humanities methods and paradigms and concepts. So what I really look forward to is a rigorous way of interacting with this document, with this report that's been generated by UCHRI that can be kind of a complicating factor as well as a kind of enlightening and illuminating factor for the struggles that we're actually having here to try to support our graduate students. It seems to be a constant crisis. And so the constant crisis our grad students deal with make this conversation that much more important. With that, I'll continue by offering my attempt at concise introductions of my faculty colleagues who graciously agreed to serve as respondents for the conversation today. And I apologize for butchering your biographies. I cannot devote the time I'd like to honor you, but just bear with me as I try to do my best to introduce you to everybody in case they don't know you. Our first respondent, Adrián Félix, earned his PhD in politics and international relations at the University of Southern California. His research is on the politics of Mexican migration, diaspora, transnationalism, race, and citizenship. He's been published in a wide variety of top-tier academic journals, including American Quarterly, Latin American Research Review, and Latino Studies. Before he came to UCR, Professor Félix taught in the Department of Latin American and Latino Studies at UC Santa Cruz. And he's the author of this tremendously important and beautiful book, Specters of Belonging, The Political Life Cycle of Mexican Migrants, published by Oxford University. And it won the 2019 Best Book in Latino Politics Award issued by the American Political Science Association. Second respondent is my longtime colleague and friend, Cathy Gudis, who's a public humanities scholar of first order. Her practice engages histories of race, place, and space in Southern California. For more than 2 decades, she's worked with art and history museums in the work of historic preservation, as well as in multi-platform place-based projects that explore how public space is privatized, landscapes racialized, and inequalities of access contested. I've been right there with Cathy doing kind of participating in some of this work, thanks to her gracious invitations. And I can't communicate just how much it's changed me. Among other curatorial exhibition and preservation activities, Cathy's developing now a book project that addresses the history of Skid Row in terms of activism, art, and community building, looking at a 50-block area of downtown LA through the lens of the LA Poverty Department's 35-year history as a performance collective museum and archive. She's writing a series of case studies collected under the title Framing Los Angeles, Place, Public History, and Performance. Aleca Blanc is a scholar of modernism, specializing in Latin American art and architecture with a focus on Brazil. She's currently at work on a book about that period entitled Concrete and Steel, Artists in Industrial Brazil, in which she considers how a young avant-garde generation in Brazil's cosmopolitan centers reimagined their relationship to the rapidly modernizing society in which they found themselves. She's the book reviews editor for Latin American and Latinx visual culture. In the coming year, she'll be doing archival research in Rio de Janeiro as a Fulbright Fellow. Blanc was co-curator of Making Art Concrete, works from Argentina and Brazil in the Patricia Phelps de Cisneros collection, an exhibition at the Getty Museum in September 2017, and part of the region-wide initiative, Pacific Standard Time, Los Angeles, Latin America. And finally, my colleague Sherryl from Media and Cultural Studies, actually, Sherryl Vint. Sheryl's research focuses on speculative fiction, especially relationships with science and technology. She works broadly within a Marxist cultural studies tradition. She's recently completed 2 books, because of course she has. First, Science Fiction, published in 2021, for MIT Press's Essential Knowledge series, which outlines the importance of science fiction as a way of thinking about and responding to socio-technical reality. The other, Biopolitical Futures in 21st Century Speculative Fiction, also published 2021, theorizes how speculative fiction interrogates a number of sites where bodies intersect with biotechnology in the marketplace, cryonics, transplant surgery, IVF, clinical drug trials, synthetic biology, so forth. Sherryl directs the Speculative Fiction and Cultures of Science program here at UCR, where she also founded the Science Fiction and Technoculture Studies Book Prize. She's an editor of the journal Science Fiction Studies and was previously a founding editor of the journal Science Fiction, Film, and Television. She edits the book series Science and Popular Culture at Palgrave. Again, my apologies, there's much more I could say about each and every one of you. I mostly just want to thank you all for being so generous with your time and your energy and coming out here to participate in this today. And I'm going to hand the mic over to my co-director, Jeanette Cole.
Thanks, Dylan. Terrific. So it falls to me to do the somewhat austere housekeeping first. A reminder that this Zoom meeting is being recorded, so please also mute your mics. Closed captioning is available through the Zoom menu, and you can drop, as always, questions into the chat that we will then address later in the Q&A. And I wanted to thank Dylan for this terrific introduction, and also add that this is part of Arts and Humanities 2.0, as we've called it for now, a new initiative to rethink grad education, grad studies at UCR, which is something that sprang out of discussions with our grad dean, Sean Bowler. And I just wanted to draw your attention to another event on April 20th, I think, Why the Arts and How the Arts, with which will be a roundtable discussing the role of arts education in the college and beyond, an idea that Iri Jeffy-Burke brought to the center, and we will advertise that one, of course, in due course. Now, I'm having the tremendous pleasure of introducing the person who is going to talk with us about this terrific booklet, Stories from the Field today, Kelly and Brown. And thank you, Kelly, for joining us and for making all of this possible. This is actually the event that launches, the entire initiative. So I think it is a good event, and it is an important topic and a very important booklet. Kelly is Associate Director of UCHRI, where she manages a diverse portfolio of projects, including the UC-wide competitive grants program, Humanists at Work, and Horizons of the Humanities, among others. Her professional background includes 22 plus years of experience in public policy and administration at the city, county, and state levels of California government, including a PhD in literature from UC Santa Cruz. While recent scholarship addresses issues of professionalization, the work of the humanities, and the future of grad education, she finds herself thinking more and more about alumni engagement and the need to look far outside the academy for many things, but especially conversations about professionalization and grad education. And with that, please join me in a warm welcome to Kelly and Brown, and I'm handing this meeting over to her.
Thank you all. Thank you for that introduction, Jeanette. It's good to meet you, and it's good to be here. And I just want to start by thanking you all for having me here, for the Center for Ideas in Society, for Sean, all of you in particular. Hopefully it comes across in the booklet, and if not, it'll come across today. I am as much personally invested in these kinds of conversations as I am professionally. And so I just appreciate the opportunity to talk through this and to talk through it with an intimate group of faculty. And I think we have grad students, maybe undergrads in the room. And so I know that metrics tend to say like more is better, but that's not my approach. And actually that's something that we would address in some of the conversations in Humanists at Work. They really allowed us to focus the conversation. So I'm thankful to be here. So here's my plan for the next 30 minutes or so. I want to spend about 15 minutes talking about context and background on Humanists at Work in order to talk through how it inspired and influenced the Stories from the Field booklet, and to share some of the lessons we learned that may be of value to the Arts and Humanities 2.0 conversations that you're going to have. And that language of lessons learned is really what I use when I do reports to funders. I mean, really in the booklet, we talked about them as emerging practices. A lot of it is advice just that we have from doing, and I say we because in some ways I'm like representing a group of people who have been building this. Things that we learned on the ground as we were doing Humanists at Work. I want to take about 10 minutes to talk generally about the booklet and how and why I think it matters. I hope we can get to some of the detailed data points maybe in the responses, but I do think there's an argument to be made, and I should probably be the one making it, as to why the booklet should matter or matters. And then I just want to end with 5 minutes talking very concretely about so what's, next steps, more lessons learned, takeaways. I want to think big, but not so big that it's absolutely undoable, in terms of the world that we inhabit and university funding, especially for the humanities. But I do think there are some opportunities to think big, and I would love to do that with you all. So a little bit about Humanists at Work. We actually began as part of another grant called the Humanities and Changing Conceptions of Work, of which Cathy Gudis would know about because she was a faculty participant in a working group that worked on tenure and promotion as part of that grant. And that grant went to the entire UC Humanities network. So all of the humanities centers across the system in UCHRI were a part of this multi-year grant. And as the case with grants, you reach the end or close to the end, and we had a lot of money to spend. And UCHRI's director, David Theo Goldberg, said to me, have provocation. So you have a lot of money to spend. I was managing the grant. You have a lot of money to spend. What if you were thinking about the future of work for humanities PhDs? What would you do with that money? And so what I did with the money was I put together a day-long series of activities and conversations that would have given me what I thought I wanted as a grad student at Santa Cruz. Because at Santa Cruz, when I graduated in 2011, these conversations, nothing was happening around this. And so I put together, for better and worse, a day that I would have wanted as a grad student. And I'm going to talk about some of the challenges of that. We just learned a lot as we were doing Humanists at Work. But what we did as a result of that first workshop that we held, there was a faculty member in the room who, faulty as that conversation was, saw potential in it and went to the Modern Language Association and to Rosemary Thale and said, hey, the UC system has something interesting. This was at a point where the MLA was looking for partners to join Connected Academics. And I won't get into the history of Connected Academics, but it was a Mellon-funded initiative for humanities PhDs, much like what the AHA was funded to do. And so as a result, UCHRI and Humanists at Work was invited to participate in that, which gave us a huge infusion of money. And what we did with the money was we hosted 8 workshops that rotated around the system. We partnered with CIS at Riverside for a workshop several years ago. And they were 1.5 day long events where we would fly graduate students in the night before. For our first workshop, we did a pizza and beer kind of gathering and changed that as we went along. I'll tell you a bit about that in a minute. But we would fly grad students in from around the system because, of course, as San Diego grad students, how are they going to get up to Berkeley? There was never an expectation that a grad student would have to fund themselves. So that was one of the ways that we tried to build community, was bringing people to the event. We, as part of this grant, we had a paid advisory committee. And it was a competitive application process, and we would choose grad students from around the state, around the system, to participate. And really their purpose was to advise us in terms of what these workshops should look like. They would help us run them. They would create blog content, and they would be our eyes and ears on the ground to engage with grad students, because part of what you'll hear me talk about is that in order to develop this network, it really took a trusting community of people to share ideas, to be honest with one another. And the grad students who are part of our advisory committee played a key role in that. We participated in national conversations, so MLA, AHA, and other collaborations, ACLS. We created a website, which we still have running, and we also created a LinkedIn group for PhDs in the humanities, and this is an international group that has over 600 members. Right now, it's used many times to share job opportunities, but there's a lot of other potential there. So those are some of the things that we did, but I really want to spend some time talking about how we did it and to focus on process. And I'm just going to apologize. I'm actually getting over COVID, and so I apologize as you see the tissues. We felt going after that first workshop, it was very clear that we needed all the ideas and involvement from grad students that we could get. And so from then on, grad students were key collaborators for myself and for everybody else involved. And so I would just say that we learned that grad students and university staff were crucial primary collaborators. And so part of that was through our paid advisory committee, but it extended beyond that. I'm going to talk a bit about evaluations and how evaluations have served an important role at Humanists at Work. So we would run these workshops and we would do handwritten evaluations that grad students would turn in. And we learned a lot through those evaluations in terms of what grad students were interested in, what worked, what didn't work, how far do conversations need to go. So that was one of the ways that we involved graduate students as collaborators, but they were also the ones moderating and facilitating sessions. So there was that part of Humanists at Work. We were very experimental in terms of the structure of the events. So we would respond to the grad student surveys, and we took risks in terms of the types of conversations that we had. Some of them paid off and some of them didn't. But that approach of being open to that and being open to, I don't want to say failure, but just trying something It infused all of our conversations. It allowed grad students to feel comfortable putting themselves out there, making suggestions, and we would all collaborate as a group in order to make whatever idea we had even better. So I think the experimental nature is something that I heard a lot of grad students say that they really liked. We tackled topics that could be seen as peripheral or even taboo as a part of our professionalization conversations. And again, I don't like that word professionalization. I'm not really sure what it means. It can mean a lot of different things, but shorthand here, I'm just going to use it. So for example, Humanists at Work, we were the first ones nationally, I think, to recognize that grad student loan debt is very much related to professional trajectories, right? And that was something that we brought to the MLA early on and said, hey, we need to be having conversations around how student loan debt impacts what PhDs do. Actually, PhD students are in debt too. As you faculty know, there are faculty in debt too. And so that was just part of the conversation of Humanists at Work. So you would come to one of our workshops and you would go to a session on maybe LinkedIn or Resume, and then you'd have a session on debt. And it got really serious and complicated, as you could imagine. Conversations on mentorship. And so mentorship is something that spans across grad student experiences, both at the university and beyond. We were also, and here I'm just talking through how we did this, we were very attentive to the ethics of professionalism and material support for grad students. And we tried to make this very evident. So it was evident in the hotels that we put grad students up in, like from the very moment that you arrive, even before you arrived to a Humanists at Work event with an invitation, you were treated as a professional who was deserving of that respect, right? So we just tried to show it in a material way. We also, even the food that we ate, and these were things that I heard from grad students who just appreciated it. The food was food you'd want to eat. And it was food that didn't leave the footprint, you know, the garbage cans full of waste. You know, I remember having to make the case, and I know this is being recorded, but I'm going to say it anyway. I had to make the case internally at UCHRI as to why I wanted to spend $1 more a person for compostable items. I mean, this was back in 2014, 15. Things have changed since then. But those little things, the grad students read them in a way that invited them in. I think the last thing I would say about how is that PhD engagement became a defining feature. So these were events for grad students because that's what the money was for. But what I learned, so this first event that we held, I heard from the grad students who had been to the pizza and beer dinner the night before. They suggested in evaluations, wouldn't it be nice if we invited PhD alumni to come and talk with us over dinner? And I was like, yeah, actually, I really wish I had thought about that. So for the next workshop, what we did was we invited PhD alumni at Work in the World to come, and in advance, the grad students would have a list of who was attending, and then they would identify who they wanted to talk to. And we would set up, they were like wedding dinners on steroids, where the grad students would get to identify who they wanted to talk to, and we would set the groups up at dinner, mixing campuses, mixing disciplines, right? Because that's really important for UCHRI, is that we're doing this, you know, cross-campus thing. And then the networkers, the PhD alumni, would move from table to table over courses. So we'd have like the cocktail course and then the starter. And so over the course of a night, you would at least get to talk to 4 people. And so we tried that. And then what I heard from the PhD alumni who were in the room is they said, wouldn't it be nice if we got a chance to network with one another before we networked with the grad students? And so then we added that on. And so Humanists at Work, for the last 4 workshops, what we essentially did was the grad students would go into a room and learn how to network while the PhD alumni were talking with one another, and then the grad students would come in. So just the PhD engagement was just really important. We evolved as a community very much over the years, and it was very much, but the most constant and valuable aspect of Humanists at Work was the networking part, was the community of grad students and of PhD alumni. And I just want to continue talking about the ways in which we have evolved, because we began Humanists at Work as very much a white woman gathering. And, you know, it was something I noticed at the first workshop. It was something I really noticed at the second workshop, at which point conversations very actively began. And we worked hard over the course of about 6 years to diversify who was attending Humanists at Work. Panels were always diverse because we had more control over that in terms of who you invite to talk and present. But in terms of the community, that was something that it took a lot of hard work from the grad advisory committee, as well as all of us, to diversify. And I mention this because here are my lessons learned from Humanists at Work before I talk about the booklet, is that diverse, like questions and conversations around diversity influences everything. And I just want to register for a moment that I am still frustrated by how white the conversation around professionalization is in the United States, like nationally, but even across the UC. And so that's something that I think we need to address, and that I think we need to change. I mean, that was just a big lesson learned. These are obvious lessons, right? I would say we also learned that professionalization conversations have to make space for and actually encourage critical reflection on a wide variety of topics. And my advice is to lean into uncomfortable conversations. And so I might give you a brief, there are uncomfortable conversations that we had around debt and mentorship and conditions at the university. Those are all, like, if you're going to talk about professionalization, you can't ask them to come in and put themselves in a box and not deal with that. But even running these events, the impulse is to make things perfect and to smooth over. The impulse can be to smooth over discord. And we learned very quickly not to do that. I don't know if I have time to give you an example, but I'll just put this out there. One of the things that a very practical skill that we wanted grad students to get at Humanists at Work gatherings was how to write a resume. And when I was contemplating how to do that, there are, of course, experts all across the campus who can help grad students and who do help grad students craft resumes. I wanted somebody from the outside, and I wanted somebody from the outside for a lot of different reasons. I wanted us to be challenged with how we think about our expertise, but I also think that we spend so long talking to ourselves in the university, and this was an opportunity to get outside of it. I will quickly say I found an awesome person, and I worked with him. He was skilled with working with people doing mid-career changes, and I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. Actually, you've been doing a PhD for 7 to 10 years, and you're going to go and do something, maybe that's an interesting way to think about it. I worked with Jared. Jared's amazing. And I talked him through all the details, like what's a dissertation and what does it involve and the types of skills. And he's up there in Berkeley giving the presentation, and he calls it a 30-page thesis, and everybody in the room fucking groans. And I smoothed over it. I just was moved it along. And of course it came to bite me in the evaluations, which is what is this? And so those moments would continue to come up at all of the workshops. And instead of resisting them, next time when it came up, I paused the conversation, was let's talk about this, what just happened. And by the end, we're having conversations about how are the humanities known? It became much more about what does a PhD even mean? Why is it significant? So anyways, that's an important lesson for us. Along with that, I would say that the intellectual matters. You can't ask grad students to set aside that part of their experience to then come into these workshops as though their intellectual projects are somehow separate or different than this. And I think this is where faculty play a critical role. So I will say that more faculty in the room for this part of it, I think is a good thing, but I think staff should be encouraged to push at that too. Grad student investment was just the most staying part of Humanists at Work. But grad students, they need to see themselves in what they're doing, and they should be the ones helping generate the topics as well as the approach. And I would say, some of us went through grad school, and I myself am 6 figures in student loan debt, picking up student loan debt because I couldn't live on that stipend that Santa Cruz paid me. But some of my colleagues were doing amazing amounts of side hustles. And what I've learned from the Humanists at Work community is that those people who are doing a lot of those side hustles have a lot of skills to share and have a really good sense of what's useful to work through for other kinds of career prospects. And so I think that there's a wealth of information. But grad students, of course, need to feel safe sharing it. And what I did hear is that grad students, those who are doing the side hustles, typically didn't share that with their faculty. So they could share it at Humanists at Work, but I don't think they could share it on their campuses in the same way. Staffing matters, and I'm going to talk about this at the end. You need somebody who is listening and thinking through this and who's working across disciplines. And, you know, I really appreciate how the AHA funded. I know that they had a funded staff person at UCLA, for example, who was able to give all of her time and attention to working on these issues for the PhDs at UCLA history. And I'm sure they gained a lot. I would argue that one of the things that UCHRI and the UC Humanities Network offers is that cross-campus and cross-disciplinary engagement. And I think that it allows for a kind of connection and a sharing of experience that is really valuable. And that's something that we have. And so I think it would be important to have a staff who work across the disciplines, is my point, but also a staff who can push back. And so I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. And then the last thing I would just say is that we learned that one size does not fit all. And that's with the kind of evolution. I mean, I had to, because, you know, 2 workshops a year, how am I going to get grad students to like leave their campus and spend the time and fly up? I mean, yeah, a nice hotel is good, but it's got to be worth their time. And it really forced me to think creatively. And I'm not suggesting that the campuses don't do this, that events don't evolve, but it was a focus for us, and I'm glad it was. So I'm going to move for a few minutes to talk about the stories from the field booklet. And I just want to say that, you know, I am critical of the UC in many, many ways, but I actually think that this project represents some of the best attributes of what our institutional collaborations can yield. It's unique, this booklet and what it represents. You know, yes, UCHRI and Humanists at Work was at the center of it, but we are working across all 10 grad divisions with UCOP. There were a lot of people involved in the data collection here. And I think that it's special. I will say that we as the UC system, and I'm not going to get into the history because it's in the booklet, so hopefully you've had a chance to read it. And if not, I'm happy to talk about it. We were the only member institution who proposed doing qualitative alongside the quantitative. And part of that is a capacity issue. We are also the only grantee to produce a thing like the stories from the field booklet. And I'm not just saying like keep UCHRI alive for that, but there's something to be said for a humanities institute or an organization like that works across, who can think big picture like that. And so the UC is special in that way. The UC is special in other ways, which I don't have time to get into, but as we were a part of these national conversations, the criticality that UC PhD students would bring to these conversations were so important. I can't even begin to tell you, like, we were in conversations where, you know, we would have to make the case why having what it would mean to have Department of Homeland Security at a career center event, like what that says to grads, you know, so there's just a way in which the UC has a lot to offer. And I think that there are spaces for us to continue intervening in the national conversation. I do want to, the other special thing about this booklet is that the UC system, because of our size, the data that was collected for the first round of the Council of Graduate Schools grantees, the UC represents over 50% of the data. So I know the humanities is a smaller part of that, but just to acknowledge that this data booklet, when you compare us to the rest of the folks who are doing this nationally, we represent quite a large category. The quantitative part of the booklet was a solid start. And I'm not a survey person, so you know, I don't want to critique it too much. I will say I was glad that the UC adapted some questions. There is still a lot missing, you know, like I would really love a question about debt alongside economic outcomes. And I would really like questions that identified the adjunct more clearly, because in the humanities, that's a very traditional, if now, career trajectory. But what I will say is something for us to be aware of is that the issue of the missing email addresses for roughly 40% of our alum is still an issue, right? So, you know, it goes to this issue of tracking, which I will talk about also. The qualitative component, the focus group components, is the one that was my personal contribution to this project in terms of the UC application to CGS. And I will say that it allowed us to open up issues in key ways, really important ways, certainly demographically, but also the topics that we were addressed, the kind of work that it fosters now is only possible through qualitative engagement. I just don't think that you could get there through the quantitative. One of the reasons that I proposed the focus groups was because I wanted this data that I didn't think we were going to get through the quantitative. The other reason I wanted it was for PhD engagement, right? So getting these PhDs in a room and picking their brains, and they had a lot to say around the future of graduate education. I also wanted to give back. And so giving back meant allowing them the space to network with one another. And I won't go into the specifics, but there were several people who made connections in their focus groups. There were groups of like 5 to 7 people that I held around the state, that they made professional connections that then helped them, move careers. I mean, there's a way in which like it just spreads out. And I know of some of the impact it had, but I think that the very act of reaching out and asking for these opinions also signals a level of investment that the institution has in where they are and what they're doing. I'm interested in work just generally as a topic, and I think that they're interested in talking about it. So the booklet does offer a lot of data points to consider, and I just want to drop a few links in the chat. So as a reminder that I drew this from UCOP, and if you haven't had a chance to go to their dashboard, you should. The first link is to a dashboard that we used to make stories from the field. And the second one is to a more recent dashboard that I haven't actually had a chance to analyze and would love. There is a lot to say. And the advice that I had gotten from Carol Giannetti, who is the PI of this project, she's the former grad dean at Santa Barbara. She said, you know what, put together a 2-page document, Kelly, that is quick and easy to read and that gets people to visit, like a site. And I wasn't able to do that. In some ways, I just felt like there was so much. And so we ended up going with a really long document. But I think it's important to address economic outcomes, for example. I think it's important to talk about professional preparation. I also thought it was important to add missing pieces. And we tried to be honest about what we did wrong and what we missed. But I think it's interesting and important to know where PhDs go, how they think about the PhD experience, the role of the adjunct. So those were all pieces that just we wanted to make sure how to place there. There's so much more to say about the Stories from the Field booklet, but I'm not going to talk about specific data points, and hopefully you all will bring that up. What I want to end with are just 5 takeaways that I'm going to just go through in the next 6 minutes and then be done. Network matters, community matters. The most lasting, I'm repeating myself, but I just want to say that the most lasting element of Humanists at Work was around this network. And I want to make a point, and it's not unrelated to debt, which is that for underrepresented students or for students who come from families who don't have certain kinds of professional networks, the network really matters. And rather than putting on them to individually go out and try to make it for themselves through informational interviews, which require a lot of research, the institution can do a lot. And that's what I think Humanists at Work did. It's certainly what I tried to do. It's what I've seen exist through my friend circle that's developed as a result. At UCHRI, I take some responsibility for that I think we have a responsibility to network people in that way. So network matters. I would say if you do nothing at all, just track your PhDs, all of them. Had we better tracked our PhDs, I'm convinced we would have gotten better survey results. If you look at the data that I include at the end, the percentage of humanities PhDs who responded to the survey was higher than the general overall response rate. So the general overall response rate across all fields was like in the 40s. And in the humanities, it was in the 60s, right? So humanists wanted to respond to this, but we were missing 40% of their information, right? So let's track our PhDs. I think there are a lot of reasons to do this, probably pretty obvious, but PhD engagement, I mean, this is the position I would want every campus to have. I would want one person, maybe it's an assistant dean position in the grad division or the humanities division, who is thinking about alumni engagement outside, alongside, and inside the university. It was so clear to me from the focus groups that grad students want to give back. They want to talk about what went well in their grad programs, what advice they have. They're still very much committed, but they're not engaged. And when they are engaged, it's quite transactional. It's come and do this workshop and then see ya, and your PhD alumni are just going to approach this differently. I mean, if I were to make the case to upper admin, I would say you invest in a staff member who is able to push back against the institution in key ways, who's able to think creatively across departments, who cares about PhDs, who cares about grad education. You have this person come in and you begin reaching out. I actually think it would result in money that goes to the university. I mean, I hesitate saying this, but like, I'm happy to give back to Santa Cruz in a variety of ways. I have not yet given back financially for some reasons. But I think that if I were more engaged in a different way, that might change. I was actually thinking about it today on my run, like what would I give to the university? And like, sad to say that we still need to do summer support for grad students, but grad students need summer support. Like if I were on an alumni engagement council, one of the things I would suggest is like, how do we support our grad students over the summer? Like, is there a chance to raise money around that? There's a bunch of ideas. So I would say investment in PhD engagement also contributes to thinking bigger about the university. I haven't even gotten into conversations that I'd want to have about like completely redoing the university, but I would start with my alumni. I actually think they feel free to talk in ways that I think they're certainly interesting. Last two things I would say is that the grad engagement requires honesty. And this is where if you have a staff member who is like, I put myself out there. I will say I shared a lot of personal details, but I don't think you necessarily need to do that. But grad students need to feel like they can be honest, and that's challenging. I also think you need to do a needs assessment. I don't think we can assume we know what grad students need entirely. We attempted to do this through evaluations with Humanists at Work. The other thing I'll share with you was one year, several members of our grad advisory committee, they wanted to do needs assessments on their 4 campuses. Oops, sorry, let me redo the chat. So they started reaching out and talking to grad students. So I think that that's something that we learned was really important. Yeah, I was going to say the staffing issue. I was going to end on staffing. I know, we're really understaffed at UCHRI. I think that's the case when I talk to all my colleagues just at all universities. I think that there are ways to invest, though, that what you would get would be more than worth the investment. And I do think that staffing is a part of that. I'm an admin staff advocating for more admin. There's a problem with that. However, I think if you do it creatively and with very targeted outcomes that you want, I actually think you could address a lot of the challenges that you're having, both in departments and divisionally. So I'll stop there right in my 30 minutes, and I'm happy to talk about everything and anything. So I'm looking forward to this.
Thank you, Kelly. And I'm not going to over facilitate here. I'm just going to flow right into the responses, and I put it in chat. We'll go Adrián, Cathy, Aleca, then Sherryl.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you, Kelly, for the presentation. Thank you all for being here. My name is Adrián Félix. I'm an associate professor and the director of graduate studies in the Department of Ethnic Studies here at UC Riverside. I am actually a political scientist by training, but a humanist at heart. In fact, I've always been in interdisciplinary spaces and departments. Prior to coming to UC Riverside, I was in Latin American and Latino studies at UC Santa Cruz. And even thinking back to my training, my graduate training, I always found myself gravitating towards interdisciplinary spaces, always gravitating towards colleagues in the humanities, because I quickly realized that the social sciences, my home discipline, couldn't offer the tools that I needed, the conceptual tools, the methodological tools, to do justice to and to really understand a phenomenon as complex as Mexican migration, which is what I focus on. Again, a social scientist by training, but a humanist at heart. and can speak to this in multiple levels. I can kind of momentarily wear my political science hat and talk about survey data and the methods that went into this study, for example. But I could also talk about this kind of from an insider-outsider perspective, because by virtue of being in interdisciplinary spaces, I've been in intellectual communities where humanities scholars are side by side with social science scholars, right? Humanities graduate students with social science grad students, and humanities faculty with social science faculty. And I think I've reading the report and the data, both the quantitative data and the qualitative data, which we just heard summarized from Kelly, reminded me of kind of a career-long kind of observations and patterns that I see in regards to the broader biases that exist in academia against the humanities, and how sometimes that gets that permeates even into spaces that one might not expect that to manifest itself in interdisciplinary spaces. This kind of structural and epistemic marginalization of humanities knowledge production, for example, popped up in basically in all these different spaces that I've navigated in throughout my career. You know, the booklet talks about, you know, what constitutes a quote serious scholar, right? For example, and I would add to that, for instance, you know, what we mean by a quote rigorous scholar, or even in some of the spaces that I've been, what we mean by who constitutes a radical scholar, right? For those of us who are in intellectual communities that are vested in knowledge production that is community-based, community-facing, and in solidarity with aggrieved communities' political struggles and social movement building. I've been, you know, struck by how those larger biases against the humanities sometimes seep into even some of those spaces. And we see this from how we train graduate students in interdisciplinary spaces, you know, concerns about what's considered quote marketable, right? What skills are marketable, conversations and debates about training students with a quote disciplinary spine, even in interdisciplinary spaces, which oftentimes is also a way of saying like, well, these disciplines are more quote unquote serious or rigorous or more marketable, et cetera. And of course, we see this in more structural patterns, right? The report says we have to come up with structural solutions to structural problems. When we look at hiring practices, recruitment practices, you know, it's not a coincidence, it's not a surprise that in many interdisciplinary spaces, oftentimes the humanities is the area that is most underrepresented, where graduate students who are in the humanities have a hard time finding mentors. And so that kind of, you know, adds to this pattern of sort of structural and epistemic marginalization or sidelining, if you will. So I think it's important to challenge those institutional cultures and departmental dynamics around these patterns, and of course the structural and systemic level issues that are pointed out in the report and that were alluded to in Kelly's remarks. And if I could just kind of mention, out of the many different data points that were presented, Kelly kind of encouraged us to maybe bring some more up for conversation here. I really wanted to emphasize the point about mental health and the different comments that were made about isolation and alienation, especially in the kind of pandemic, post-pandemic context. Those of us who are working with graduate students, not just in the humanities, but across the board, I think have been faced with those mental health crises. And you know, I wanted to kind of mention that and kind of maybe hear from others, whether we think that in this kind of post-pandemic context transition, whether we are now finally paying greater attention to this long-standing issue that for too long was kind of just, you know, not even discussed. I could say more, but I know I had to keep my remarks to 5 minutes, so I'll stop there, and I look forward to more conversation and comments.
Thank you so much. I agree 100% with all you so eloquently said. My name is Cathy Gudis, and I'm an associate professor in the history department, where I direct the public history program, which is a graduate program. It's a PhD program. And I have to say, I'm going to speak really quickly because I have a lot to say. And a lot of it is laced with anger. And I also want to say that for many years, when I first started at UCR, I started in 2006, I thought to myself, after being here a little while, graduate programs where dreams go to die. because no one was paying attention to the outcomes. So I am really grateful for the forthright ways in which this panel and the approaches of UCHRI and the larger programs are finally attending to the challenges that we have long faced. This is not new. And so I want to mention 5 things that I think are really important that intersect with what folks have said already. One is that we need to have systemic change at all levels. We're bleeding majors at the undergraduate level, in the humanities. Our relevancy and applicability to the broader world needs to be asserted in understandable terms, and our applicability to the most socially pressing issues of our time can be addressed through the humanities at every level. So that's one thing. As part of that, I think the hierarchies of the university need to be upended. Dylan's bio is incredibly frank. Dylan, it says your day job is at the university, and I understand that impulse, right? I don't take any of my satisfactions intellectually or socially from CAP. Right? I take it from the labor that is not rewarded. Much of it is teaching and service according to the university standards. So that's part of that longer span systemically. But more practically, I think we need to change the narrative. And this fits into what Adrián said just now, that unwittingly, there are hierarchies and marginalizations constructed around the humanities and around academic jobs, right? And regularly we hear university leadership devalue the robust options for the PhD. And I don't think people realize it, right? I was at an event just 2 weeks ago where someone in the administration said, you know, before I was able to get myself an academic job after the PhD, I worked in a museum for a while, and everyone snickered thinking, oh, well, great, you finally made it to be, you know, in the position you're in. And so I think that infiltrates a lot. And when we have our alums come back, oftentimes we'll honor those who have tenure track position lines, right? As opposed to the same people on the same panel who actually have professional experience and make a lot more money. Okay, so I think that there's a lot about the narrative and about the fact that we need to value the side hustle. We need to stop when the grad division sends back our petitions that have honestly written, my family member had cancer and I'm working on a public humanities project, and the university writes back and says, no, sorry, you're gonna have to leave, right? Because you're past the time due. Now, I'm not saying we should continue to have grad students have to work doubly hard in order to gain a diversification of public practice and professional experiences, but I do think we need to figure out our systems a lot better. So that's why I'm so super grateful that everyone is here. I also think we need to expand our horizons. I was kind of predisposed to hate the report because of the bubbles on pages 9-2, where do humanities PhDs work, when things were reduced to like management, blah. Like, you don't go to a PhD for like 10 years and then end up like saying management, unless that's what you wanted to do, right? So we have this incredible wealth of possibilities that we are learning about from our alums. So I hope we can find ways to continue that alumni discussion and engagement, and to ask people who do not have the department culture that backs them, or the privilege of coming from a background that would support them, or have so many family commitments, all of which are written about in the booklet, that we can begin to honor ways to support them as well. As we also get out of our silos, we are not interdisciplinary at a PhD level in terms of our programs. It is really hard to do that. And that we also might harness the might of the UC and of the ACLS and of humanists at work as networks that you've begun already. So we have so many opportunities if we can stop sort of, you know, working within this really snobbish set of hierarchies and begin to understand that there's a lot more at our fingertips, and that we should honor all of those opportunities. So I didn't say that as eloquently as Adrián, but I'm trying to say in different ways that idea of really the systemic change, and also the ways in which there are different patterns of marginalization that I think maybe are embedded in some of the ways that we tend to conduct our graduate programs. So I'll stop there, because otherwise I might just go on and sound way too negative, when in fact I'm really, really supportive of the booklet, of the work that went into it, and continuing the kinds of networking and careful attention to all of these options that you've begun with these panels and with the work you've done so far at UCHRI. Thanks.
I think I'm next. Hi, this has been quite fascinating, and have, you know, more than 5 minutes worth of comments. I had more than 5 minutes worth of comments before we even started the conversation. But Cathy, just to build off of what you were mentioning about museum work being undervalued. So being an academic is a second career for me. I was a curator before, a museum curator before this, and I distinctly remember my advisor in grad school commenting on, she was pleasantly surprised at how well I was doing considering my background, right? Because I had come from the museum. And this leads into one of my main takeaways, I guess. And my comments are a little bit more kind of summations of things that seem to have been diagnosed. And I think many of the comments that I read were really about, really focused on advising and a general dissatisfaction with advising, whether at the department level, whether at the individual, relationship with one's advisor. And, I think what is an advisor? Like, none of us have ever been trained or taught or given guidelines about what one does as an advisor. So you either end up being an advisor like the one you had, or you end up being the opposite because you're rejecting what the one you had did. And I have conversations with grad students all the time who will comment of like, oh, I'm so glad you're my advisor because you helped me with X, Y, and Z. Other students don't get that, or vice versa. And it's not that it needs to be a one size fits all, but I really do think that there could be, advising for incoming, new faculty, and maybe even like faculty that's been around for a while. Even just some kind of basics of what an advisor should offer. The other thing too, and this is in defense of what my advisor said to me about the museum career, which is that many people in academia have never had other jobs, right? And so I also think that there's this there's this kind of disgruntled feeling that, well, only if I get getting an academic job is the only way I'm going to be perceived as serious or whatnot. But if scholars go straight from undergrad to graduate school and then have a tenure track job, they've never looked for another job, so they don't actually have those skills. And I think it's also unfair to hold them to a standard that they don't have. And if there's no training on how to be an advisor, I mean, this is this kind of cycle. I also, one of the questions that I kept having as I was reading this report was wondering if you took into account, when you were speaking with grad students, if they had come directly from undergrad or if they had had other professional experience before going to graduate school. In my experience, so I went to graduate school twice. I did a master's, I worked for a long time, and then I did the PhD. And in my experience, students that arrive straight out of college, I think are rarely ready, or it is the rare student that is ready and is mature enough. And so I think those students who come back, even after a couple of years or 10 years or what have you, have a different engagement and have a different expectation for what a program should do for them, what an advisor should do for them. And I think that they tend to have much more success. And I remember especially when I did the PhD, almost every student that came in straight from undergrad, they were the ones that left, right? Which is fine. Also, there's no, it's not a scarlet letter to leave a PhD program. But I do think that that's quite important, because a lot of the stuff that was mentioned under grad experiences, to me spoke to that of like, well, no one tells me what to expect. I don't know how this is going to work. I don't understand, it's very opaque. And yeah, it is. But that's also the world we live in, and that this is this isn't college. And so I do think that there's an understanding that graduate school is a professional apprenticeship, right? And your advisor, to simplify matters, is your boss. And that yes, we need to be humans and understand what our students are going through, but I also think we don't need to know about all of their side hustles. And just because we don't doesn't mean we don't respect that, but that's not necessarily in our purview of what our responsibilities are as an advisor. So I mean, this keeps coming back, right? Of like, what does an advisor do? And then the other thing that I really like that you pointed out, and I myself have thought about this a lot and would love to see more of this, is in grad programs being taught how to deploy the skills that you're gaining, not necessarily as marketable skills to get a job, but how does one, with this degree, with this experience, use that, you know, as a public intellectual? Otherwise these things are just, you know, vanity projects, right? How can you take that knowledge and apply it, you know, whether it's, you know, I mean, the only thing I ever come up with is like the op-ed project, but you know, things like this where you can take your voice, you can take what you've learned and, you know, broadcast it places beyond, the monograph that gets you tenure, or the articles in the small journal. So I guess the way I feel is that PhDs are hard and they should be hard and there should be attrition. And I guess that was part of my reaction to reading the report, which is like, yeah, it's not fair. It shouldn't be easy and it shouldn't be, you know, spoon fed. This is part of, you know, becoming a professional. So, but it was great. It's given me so much to think about. And so, yes, I love the humanities.
Thank you, everyone. I also have a lot to say. I'll try to keep it short because I know we want to have some time for discussion, and I want to thank Kelly for all the work in envisioning the need for this kind of study and the conversations that she cultivated that led to this report, and to CIS and my colleagues for their responses thus far. Like Dr. Gudis, I have a lot of passion about this topic, and some of my comments come from a place of anger with the limitations of what we've been able to offer our graduate students. And I think, I mean, it's good for these conversations to have drawn our attention to what they need. I think it is a call to us to rethink within our departments how we approach some of our graduate training, and particularly how we think about the skills that graduate students are training. The part that I was really struck by in the report is page 25, where it talks about a number of skills one might have got from your degree. And I was kind of shocked, frankly, to see that other disciplines than the humanities suggested they gained these skills better than the humanities, because not only do I sort of think that's factually untrue, because I think these skills are at the core of what we do, but my current research is actually on economics and debt and kind of cultures of economic institutions. And you regularly hear the people hiring in those sectors saying that actually what they want are humanities scholars, because they have this capacity to process information, to organize it, to draw inferences from it. So in fact, employers often perceive that we have these skills in how we train our humanities students. So I think we within departments, we need to do a better job of not simply respecting the side hustle, but finding ways to make it not a side hustle, to find ways to integrate these things into careers that we're encouraging our students to manage for themselves, into what they're teaching. I think one of the things we could learn from the sciences is that they have an opportunity to get a lot of grants to fund their students' PhDs through working in the labs. And I'm not suggesting that we should make all our students like write chapters of our books or something like that. But I think around questions of pedagogy, that we should look for, whether it's UCHRI or UCOP, that there should be student-centered grants that focus on pedagogy. I think a place where we could do really well in funding our grad students is to imagine the TA is not simply something that gets attached to huge courses and their job is to run discussion sections, but to imagine a TA-ship as an apprenticeship with someone in a medium-sized course where they're working directly with the faculty member, creating the syllabus, they're delivering some of the lectures under faculty supervision. So there's ways that we can be serving needs that the institution has already, while also funding our graduate students with money they very much need. I would love it if there was a staff member who could be looking for training grants that we could apply for and finding ways to have instruction on pedagogy that we could be giving to our students and paying them as they're undergoing these apprenticeships, because many of them, at least in English, which is a department where I teach, they're going to end up at teaching centered institutions. And we don't put enough emphasis on pedagogical training and what we're able to provide to them because we don't have the resources to do that. But if we could more robustly imagine pedagogical training as part of PhD training, not simply as their labor, but as them working with us, but while also compensating them from that work, I think it would improve the experience for our undergrads and improve grad funding. The other thing I wanted to say is I think we need much more emphasis on the public humanities. Again, my colleague, Dr. Gudis, is a leader in this field, but we, and here again, it can't all fall on the departments. We need help from our senior administration. We need help from UCHRI in understanding and supporting that in the humanities is where we have the knowledge and skills to think through complex social problems, to understand the histories that lead up to questions of marginalization or polarization, to historically contextualize public debate in an era of massive information. And so, I mean, while I appreciate that the report draws attention to salaries and job prospects for humanities students, and obviously we don't want them to be jobless and in debt, I also think it's really important to continually reframe what the university is about is more than vocational training. And we need like support from our higher admin, we need support from the messaging of senior administrators on campus, that training people to be good citizens, training people to engage in community, training people to do work that helps and supports a more inclusive and socially just society. These things are as important as creating new patents. And the people who are experts in creating job-centric skills, you know, they also are the ones who produce so-called social media that's created like a polarized society. So I think the things that we tend to value because the market tells us they're valuable, we cannot let our training focus on that. And then the final thing that I wanted to say is that we might also think really creatively about ways we can fund our students and build their skill sets in terms of apprenticeships where they might work in staff positions within the university, that this is another way to fund them as RAs working in administrative positions, because the skills that they have are ones where they can take to work for 501Cs, or they can work for grant writing for art galleries or museums. And so we have various offices that do these kinds of things and offer support to our undergrads. So if we could think of RA-ship funding much more capaciously than you're helping a faculty with their research or you're running discussion sections, I think we could both serve a lot of needs on campus and we could prevent our students from having to constantly be working off campus to support themselves, and we would enrich the experience for them and for our undergrads. Sorry that I went over my time, thanks.
Maybe I'll open it up. I'll co-facilitate with Jeanette, but maybe we should open it up, and maybe Kelly, if you have any responses to the responses, maybe we can start with you.
Tons, but I think there are two things I just want to say. One, I think the anger is justified and warranted. And I think that I'm just glad to hear that people care, you know, because there is a way in which some of these conversations, some of the challenges that we've had in Humanists at Work is getting faculty to attend. Some of it's our bad in terms of messaging, but a lot of the pushback that we got was that it's like that it's a neoliberal blah, 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 that just is all about getting people jobs that they weren't trained for, you know, without actually grappling with like the complexities of graduating with a PhD and then thinking about what's next. And, you know, it doesn't have to be adjuncting. So I think, you know, so I think that I welcome the anger, like, and to be honest, I've been sitting with this so long, I'm like no longer angry, you know? And so it's nice to like, just be like, yeah. And then Aleca, I just want to thank you, Aleca, right? I just want to thank you for your comments. Like I'm thinking, you touch on something, which is that when you enroll in a grad program, you are an adult choosing to go to a grad program. No one's forced you to do this. I would say that not all of us, I took 5 years to go work, in government, and then decided to go back. There was still this way in which I didn't know how to read my offer letter. I didn't have anyone to help me. Like my family didn't know, like they don't, no one advised me.
Yeah,
and I
absolutely.
actually didn't do the calculations correctly to realize like, what's that gap? How are you going to cover that gap? So yes, but there was something else. I think though that what you point to is something also important for us to recognize, which is that faculty can't and shouldn't be everything in this conversation, and that it's good to have roles to play, and being open and understanding is one thing, but being able to provide advice, is something else. Because I guess I have one other thing to say and then I'll stop. I didn't go to grad school to learn how to project manage. I went to grad school for two reasons. I wanted to learn how to teach, and I wanted to study with people who could advise me in terms of that particular field, right? If I wanted to learn how to project manage, I would stay at government. I would stay doing that. I guess the other thing that does say, because I think that the point that you raised about how do we know whether people have gone that, going right through from undergrad to grad, as we're thinking about these survey questions, that would be an important question to add, actually. Like that would have been interesting to know. The argument I've always made to Santa Cruz, it's Santa Cruz, like literature, they might have placed a few people in tenure track positions, but like, it's not Berkeley, it's not UCLA. And since graduating, the case I've made to Santa Cruz is like, what's your strengths, Santa Cruz? Like, where have your PhDs gone? And what's really interesting is that the people that I know in grad school, so many of us came with other kinds of experience, public facing experiences, like public engagement. And I've been saying to Santa Cruz, like, that's an important story for you all. And that's what I would say to Riverside is like, what are the important, this is so cheesy, stories, I don't want to use that word, but like, what are Riverside's strengths? Seriously, like, what is your engagement? Like, what are you doing at work in the world? Like, what is the impact? And until you track them, you don't know. But yeah, these were all, there's so much, you guys all brought up so much. So I want to stop there so that there's time for others.
Yeah, if I can chime in. Someone wrote, I love the fire that I see here. And I do love that too. I'm afraid I can't really muster as much anger, but I understand. I do understand. I just wanted to share a quick experience, and that is along the same lines of what Aleca said, and then Kelly responded to. So when I came here in 2008 from the European academic system, my first impression was, oh my God, these expectations of the grad students are tremendous. They are outrageous. They're eating me alive. They wanted, and then I learned the term spoon feeding, which I'm, of course, cautious in using now, but I thought this is incredible. This time of your lives is so much about formation and self-formation. And, what I can do is I can give you hints, I can help here and there, I can nudge you, and I can certainly give professional advice. But the expectations were and are, I have to say, huge. So for me, it was very difficult drawing a line between the professional me and, all those other things. Like, I want to feel safe. I want to have a job, and it came with so much pressure that I was really having a hard time in the first years. And I was trying to navigate my way. How do I best respond to those expectations? And I mean, I think I found a way. I think, and now I'm a hardcore mentor of my PhD and MA students, but sometimes I still wonder if I'm doing them a huge favor in being that way. I mean, for me, and I don't want to sound like an angry old woman now, no one did these things for me. I'm completely self-made. I'm a first generation college student. There was no help or background, and not from my male professors, certainly. So I'm kind of torn in these discussions, attempting to continue to ask the questions, what do we best do to do our students a favor to find themselves, and not to guide them too much? And that's, I think, a dilemma. . 。
Hey, could I pick on Sean to maybe respond a bit to what you've heard so far from folks as our grad division dean?
Sure. First of all, yeah, I've got notes. I was searching for paper for notes. I think there are, first of all, thank you for the discussion. I think it's really good to get these issues out there. And I'm sort of juggling between my bureaucratic hat and my Sean, the faculty member hat. Sometimes I think I should have literal hats to wear when if I could tell when I'm speaking. There's clearly a lot in what you said. I've got notes here about yes, to do this. I'm going to focus on one thing which is going to sound awful, right? Because, you know, the need for side hustles and the issue of debt are both like really serious issues that contribute to the kinds of mental health challenges and mental wellness that Adrián was pointing out, which have only been heightened by COVID. And I think that those are serious issues, and I don't want to lose sight that they're important. But one of the things that resonated with me a lot was this importance of networking that Kelly started with. And I think it's because that one's particularly spoke to our students, because the lack of social capital for underrepresented students or kids who are first in the family to go to college is just striking compared to, well, for example, our family members. By definition, since many of us are professionals, not the grad students, I understand, but the people with jobs on here, by definition, we're professionals. If someone in our family has a problem, we can pick up a phone and find someone. Lots of our kids do not have that, and lots of our grad students don't have that. And what I liked about that is that spoke to our students and the ones we have a commitment to serving. And it's something that doesn't require bureaucratic say-so or approval, or that I saw in the comments. It doesn't require anybody to say anything about that. It just requires the profs to start getting their alum together, basically. And that's something concrete and tangible and doable, and is something we can do. In particular, because one of the things here is this theme of, and it's a challenge that students have these days, of whether or not they belong in grad school. And I think it's on us to communicate, yes, you belong here. That's the communication that we have to say to our students. You do belong here. But of course, it's weird and odd and strange, because not everybody in grad school looks like me these days. I mean, it's not the white boy club that it used to be, which is a good thing. But it means that the social norms that an homogenous group of people could rely on no longer apply. So then we have to talk to people about that new environment and communicate that. And I think the challenges that alum face are often really helpful in that. So, oh yeah, I had that imposter syndrome. You have to get over most of it. Those kinds of stories. Or here's what I can do in my library job now. I can help you with this. I think that's a really important thing to do, both at this sort of cultural level, but also at the practical level. And so I think that that's what we can do. I think that's what we can maybe try and work on and facilitate that'll help our students succeed and flourish. So there's among the things to look about. Oh, the other one is Cathy did something that, yes, the student professional associations. I think our professional associations need to do more too. I'm tired. There's a meeting, I'm not going, but there's a meeting this week. Pay hundreds of bucks to these things every year. It's like registration is hundreds of dollars, then the membership is hundreds of dollars, then the money. Why are the professional associations actually helping our students by doing more in the way of facilitating training and networking opportunities and professionalization? So yes, the thing I took from it is, yes, these are serious issues. There isn't a silver bullet to them. I think they're common issues. I think they're common across disciplines and across campuses. But also, I think some of the things people are pointing to are addressable, doable sorts of things. So it could be more on mentoring, which was Aleca's point, for example, mentoring or advising will be good. Certainly more on mental wellness is one of my takeaways from Adrián's point. Yes, on pedagogy from Sherryl. I mean, there are all these points that I thought, yes, we can do something about it. We are trying to, I mean, this is where I'm putting on the grad division hat. We are trying to do some of that, honestly. The grad deans, for example, so the grad deans, for example, a proposed language in the APM for mentoring that's just disappeared into system-wide. So my strategy now is we can talk about the call, we can revise the call to talk more about mentoring and contributions in that sense, and we should encourage everybody to do that one. But I think the takeaways here are that, yeah, there's a lot to be angry about with grad education, I think. And partly is this, I'll say this and then finish. You know, partly is this, we've got so used to the idea that we're teaching, we've gone out of sort of a student framing of graduate education to an employee relationship of TAs and researchers. And that's not helped us think through what's good for our students, as students, and what do we need to do? And more importantly, what can we do as a community to help them? Because they need some help. That's where I am on this.
Appreciate that, Sean. So we're in the last 8 minutes of our session, and I know we're supposed to flow into our kind of closing comments, but I did want to make space if there's any folks here who maybe want to pose one more question or one more concern to our group of participants, and to Kelly in particular, or for that matter to Sean in particular. Just unmute. So go ahead, Cheryl. I saw you.
Yeah, I just was struck by, you know, in your opening frame about a commitment to decolonizing the university and an acknowledgement of people who have always lived on this land, that I think one of the places where we could do more in terms of public humanities, public facing scholarship is in connection to local communities, both to the indigenous tribes that are in the Riverside region, but to also other communities that live in the Riverside community. And so help from senior admin in finding ways to connect to those organizations, finding ways to have internship or other networking opportunities for our students. I think that's someplace where, again, we can take the very important public good, if I want to use that term, kind of oriented work that so many of our scholars do, and connect with people in the community in ways that would enrich Riverside overall. So that's something that having senior admin help us make those connections and support and foster those connections by being welcoming to people outside the campus, I think would be helpful.
And I think, Cheryl, I think that point actually ties into the question you raised just a few minutes ago, Kelly, around the things that differentiate and distinguish, potentially differentiate and distinguish humanities, interdisciplinary humanities affiliated or, you know, kind of affinity scholars, is we seem to have an unusual block of folks who do work in that particular way as a primary part of their research and scholarship. I think it is distinctive. Although I think the point Cheryl just made is an important one, which is that, you know, as a I'm in my 21st year as a faculty member here. I'm not convinced that particular form of research excellence is legible to many of our upper administrators, present company excluded. Sean. So that was not present company excluded, you know, because I know Sean gets it, but many folks don't. And actually many folks want to kind of discipline and compartmentalize the forms of, well, they want to discipline and compartmentalize how notions of engagement with community are even understood to begin with. So I think that's an important point. I just wanted to add to what Cheryl said. Other folks, well, in our last 5 minutes here.
Can I add one more comment directly to that, and that is about international experience. So when we organized, my colleague Chris and I, like I know this a couple of years ago, an excursion outside of the US to Europe, half of the group of our 10 graduate students had never been outside of the country and had to apply for a passport. And that was a profound experience for them to be away and be away from their parents. And, you know, we took them to you know, other universities, and they saw how classes are taught there. And I still get emails from them as to how profound that was. So I would like to see more money put into things like that, where we can show them, okay, this is, how things work elsewhere, and give them that opportunity to travel. I mean, we have these travel grants, but this is just a drop of cold water on a hot stove. It's not really a lot. So this is something I think is also very important for self-formation and understanding the academy.
Yeah, money's always good. And I mean, Brian, to me, even if you're Elon Musk, you still want another billion or 12 billion or whatever it is. But and it's good, and especially for grad students who are struggling, and struggling more now, partly because of the issues of debt that Kelly highlighted, especially among our students. Our students have high levels of debt than others. But I was struck, I don't know what to call them. And yes, to Cheryl's point there, that yes, our budget model needs to change. So yes to money. But what I'm struck by is that the conversation isn't that just unfolded, wasn't just about money. It was about these other things. It was about the sense of belonging. It was about the sense of worth and being respected for the work that's being done. It was about the respect for non-academic career opportunities, working in cult institutions. And it was about the challenges that people face who may not come from traditional background. And so I think for me, because I don't have money, if I had money, I'd spend it. And it just bureaucratically, the only way grad is given money, we can only spend it on grad students. That's fine. Or programming. If we had it, we'd spend it. That's not a question. That's our mission. But time and again, the conversation came back to things that aren't really terrifically costly. For somebody asked them, what are the next steps? It's like, well, any department can organize a get together, perhaps with their neighboring department. Hey, let's bring alumni in for an ice cream social or a coffee morning to talk to our grad students. Which would be, a small, I understand it's not going to fix, it's a small step, but it's an example of one of the things that might help. I'll help begin. Thanks.
Thank you, Sean. We have a couple minutes left. I think the one thing I wanted to honor is the concerns that I think all of us here know about very well, almost too well, which is the kind of unsustainable and insecure material conditions that our graduate students at UC Riverside inhabit significantly because of what is a systemic system-wide inequity around graduate student funding. And to kind of begin to try to push this toward the next steps, I know that there's at least a couple folks in chat that are asking about what are next steps? How do we address this? And I've shared this with a couple of you on this call. The necessary next step is that, we need to get on the same page as our campus advocates in the high administration, meaning our provost and our chancellor in particular, to take the case to Oakland. The UCOP, the president's office, needs to see a united front on the issue of graduate student funding and conditions of graduate student education. And I think the case of UC Riverside Humanities PhD students is case study A in presenting the case. So I think as far as next steps go, I know a couple of you brought a question. I think that's perhaps where we can try to think about collectively pushing this sequence of discussions toward as a kind of culminating conversation with our high administration. That would be what I would argue for. And if folks here are willing to participate in that and to engage in that, I would really be grateful. In particular, our respondents. I didn't mean to take up so much space that way. I know that folks have responded, and maybe if there's any closing comments from Adrián and or Cathy, I'll just take any closing comments. I know Cathy, you're about to go to class, so we're at 2:30. Either of you? Aleca, okay.
I'm just going to say network.
Please.
I'm going to say that the university can support without a lot of money. And also our university, UCR specifically, and its alumni office can support our efforts to reach out to our alums, which they have not always been positive about. They have resisted that. So I think that we do definitely find the social values, at least when we don't have the money and even the staff power, we can try to do that. So yeah, thank you so much. And I didn't mean to take the last word. Will you please take it back, Adrián?
Yeah, Aleca or Adrián, would either you like to chime in just to close us out?
I defer to Aleca.
I was going to say the same thing. What I appreciated, though, it was interesting to me because I think while there was overlap in our reactions and responses to this, we actually all brought something kind of different. And so, yeah, I appreciate hearing what everybody else's responses were and kind of what jumped out at them. So thank you. And thanks, Kelly.
Thank you.
If I may just say thank you for this. And I actually think that as you're doing this and as you're pushing to go to UCOP, Dylan, that's where I do think other campuses could be doing it along with you, because I think that Riverside, in some ways, there are alliances between, I would say, Riverside and Santa Cruz in terms of student populations and the funding model of the UC, which prioritize, where some campuses end up with more than others. And that I also think that UCHRI should be a part of, I think that the call to UCHRI to participate in it could be powerful as well. Maybe not at the UCOP level, but at other programmatic levels.
I'm gonna hold you to that. Thank you for putting that out there, Kelly. Appreciate that. Adrián, I don't want to cut you off before we call it a day.
I would just call attention to some of the comments that grad students have put in the chat here. There was a couple of grad students in today's meeting talking about funding issues, talking about grad students who are parents, mothers, lack of support in that area as well. So, just more issues to add to our list here. Thank you all.
And much appreciation to Kelly. Thank you, Catherine Henshaw, of course, as always, our fearless, relentless executive director. And thank you all for coming. We'll see what the next sequence, and thanks, Jeanette, for outlining the sequence earlier. You all will definitely be the first informed about how this series begins to move forward. Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks all. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye,
everybody.
thanks everyone.